Welcome to this edition of our podcast, considering some of the challenges and opportunities for trust leaders and thinking about the future of trust leadership. I'm absolutely delighted today to welcome four trust leaders, one former trust leader, two chief executives and the chair of a trust. And today we're going to be looking at the issue of mergers and essentially what makes for a successful merger of two trusts, and what are some of the lessons we can take from mergers as well. We know that mergers are becoming more prevalent across the academy trust sector. The number of small academy trusts, and particularly single academy trusts, has been high for a number of years, and we're beginning to see more trusts grow, and we're beginning to see more trusts come together. But that's easier said than done. It has to be sustainable, it has to be done with careful due diligence, careful thought, and in the best interests of children, young people and communities. So I'm really delighted today to welcome four guests. Phil Crompton, an associate of Forum Strategy and the former chief executive of Trent Academies Group. Julianne Hewitt, who has just overseen the merger of her trust and has now become the Epworth Multi-Academy Trust in the Northwest. Nick Osborne from the Maritime Academy Trust in Greenwich, and his chair, Tiffany Beck. So welcome to you all. Thank you for taking the time to discuss this issue today. The first question that I wanted to begin with, if I can, is where did the desire to merge come from within your trusts? And if I could begin with Phil, perhaps first of all.
Yeah, happy to pick that one up, Michael. It was really triggered by my decision that I wanted to retire, and that we had to face the reality that we didn't have a succession plan. And when the board started to look at it, they realised that there was no one in the trust that wanted to pick up where I'd been. So we talked a little bit about me continuing, but my 60th birthday was approaching, and I was thinking, I really don't want to carry on. And we had one school that had caused a few problems with Ofsted. We inherited it with special measures, and it was still an Ofsted 4. He got serious weaknesses. So the board said, look, why don't we look to merge with another trust? We've got a couple of people from business in there as well. And what they were saying was, exactly how many CEOs does the system need? We got three schools, three decent sized secondary schools, 4,000 pupils, 400 members of staff. And they said, why don't we look for another similar sort of trust, merge with them? If they've got some experience of the sort of schools that we got, it could be a real winner. And I agreed with that. And there was no real opposition from anywhere in the trust. It seemed like a logical move from the situation that we're in.
Thank you, Phil. So if I could ask the same question of Julianne, please.
Yes, ours was quite a different story, really, in that we hadn't actually considered merging until we were approached by someone to see whether we would consider merging with them. And it was a little bit of a different story in that they wanted me to become their CEO quite quickly, with this view to a possible merger further down the line. The two were mutually exclusive, but actually, as I'll share later, really benefited us in this process. So once that was raised as a board, we sat down and looked at it and thought, actually, we could see how it would benefit us, actually being a larger organisation financially, and that collective efficacy that we so desired to build upon what we'd already done.
Thanks, Julianne. And Nick and Tiffany.
There were two sort of drivers behind our merger. One was to be more sustainable moving forward, because we were a primary trust of 8 primary schools, and some of those small as well. So we felt if we were larger, it would give us more economies of scale in the back office and enable us to provide the support that we'd want to provide for our schools. And the second reason behind our eagerness to merge was that we had a lot of our schools are based in Greenwich, and they're used to collaborating and working well together, and distance makes that easy. But we've got, we had one school, a sponsor school in Medway, which, although we wanted to do the partnership work, it wasn't as easy because of the distance and the traffic on the main road connecting the areas. So for us, it was really important that if we did merge, it was in the right area, and it gave our sponsor schools the opportunity to work closer with other schools.
Great. So in some ways, some very different reasons for merging, but in other ways, that theme of sustainability comes through, actually, doesn't it? And making sure that, you know, the scale. Phil talked about how many CEOs do you need. You're talking about the widening the economies of scale in many ways and ensuring that you've got that viability across a number of schools, Nick. So sustainability comes through quite significantly there. But clearly some very different motivations as well in terms of the change that you were experiencing at Trent Academies, Phil, and looking to for a different option beyond simply looking for the next chief executive. So the next question I've got, and some of it, I think you've answered the next question really around objectives for your mergers. So I want to move on to the next question, which is, how did you come across your merger partners? Did you find them all, or did they come to you? Start with Nick on that one.
Shall I go to Tiffany on that one? Because she took the
Yes,
first
please.
call. Is that all right, Tiff?
For ours, I think it was very much, you know, we were looking to grow, and we were looking to do that sustainably, and whether that was through a single school or a larger merger, it was kind of looking at that. And what happened for us was we have quite a wide and very varied network of different people that we know, that we turn to when we have questions, that sort of thing. And it was a chair that I knew that was based out of Medway, and we would kind of share things back and forth. And so we had that level of trust already between us. And he was the one who rang me up one day and said that actually they think they needed, for sustainability reasons, but also for school improvement reasons, they really needed to look at merging, and they wanted to have that conversation.
And the similar situation for yourself, Julianne?
Yes, for us, it was very much the other trust that approached us actually wanted part of what we'd been very successful with in the Acorn Trust around our school improvement offer, our organisation, what we had within our central team. And they recognised that actually in coming together, there was something that could be shared across the two. Now, what was interesting for us was we started the initial conversation with that trust in June, July 2019, but actually in the September, we were approached by a second trust and started discussions. So we had discussions with two different trusts for a period and really had a look at where that ethos aligned. That really helped, but very much it was around looking at the possibilities of what we could do to bring that together for our pupils and for our staff.
Thank you. And for Phil, it was, I suspect, a case of for you and Trent Academies looking for that partner and going out there and finding them.
It was. We'd already got a reasonable discussion going with the Regional Schools Commissioner over various things. One of them being that we've been planning to grow ourselves, and at the last minute, the RSC had decided that particular school couldn't join us, and that distorted the way we were operating. So when I made my decision, we contacted the Regional Schools Commissioner and said, look, is there anybody that you think we could merge with? And he suggested 6 different trusts. The criteria that we set out was we wanted a trust that got some experience of working with an outstanding school, because one of our schools was outstanding. We wanted somebody that got experience of working in challenging areas, because we've got one school in a very challenging area. And we also wanted somebody that operated largely in the East Midlands. They suggested 6 that met most of those criteria. And then we whittled that down to 3 in the end.
Great, thank you. So that leads really nicely into the next question, I think, which is, what were some of the questions you asked of your potential merger partners, and were there any non-negotiables that you set up front around what the merger would look like? I'll start with Julianne on that one, please.
Yes, so we did have some non-negotiables, and first and foremost for us was around the ethos. And we recognise that the reason our trust was successful was because all the schools within it had an ethos that aligned, and we felt that any merger, as we've always said with any school that joined the trust, that ethos had to be aligned. So that for us was a real non-negotiable, that we felt very confident about that. But we asked a lot of questions around the reasons why they'd approached us, what they wanted to gain from it, as well as what we were going to gain. And really started to explore that. For us, we felt if this was going to be a true merger and not a takeover of one trust to another, that actually we needed a new name. So that was something that felt really important, that actually that external perception. And we set out a working party very early doors with trustees from both trusts and people from the central teams to really start working through some of those non-negotiables and working through those questions that we had.
Thank you. So could I ask a little bit more, Julianne, about that,
Yeah.
and on ethos? What were the kinds of ways in which you were able to determine whether the ethos did fit, and whether there was that compatibility?
For us, one of the things that we always say, so even at trust board level, when we're making decisions, we always ask the question, how does this impact the child in the classroom? And we try and keep very child focused in the decisions, even when we're making strategic decisions. So we wanted somebody who actually their focus was about the children as well, and about the offer for the children. So it was about what they were talking about. And if they come and only talked about the financial gains and the operational gains, which were really important, don't get me wrong, and that kind of economies of scale, that would have been a signal to us that actually there wasn't that alignment, because that was more important.
Thank you. So same question to Tiffany and to Nick on this one then, please. And just thinking about some of those non-negotiables and some of the questions you asked to determine whether that it was going to work.
Well, ours was slightly different. So I was asked to be interim CEO to start the merger process and to start the school-to-school support. So the previous trust, they'd had a lot of conversations at board level about the sort of trust that they were looking for. So when I came in, it was really about, could we work with, did we have similar values with the people that worked in the organisation? And the two key areas really were the heads within the schools. Did we have critical mass? So not did all of them buy into, but did enough buy into it and want to work in that way? And how we tested that in the early days was by working as one trust as early as possible. So getting the schools working together. And we actually, COVID was an advantage for that, because we were addressing areas that we'd never had to deal with before. It made sense to come together as a collective. So it was able to test out the sort of values people had at that point and the whole collaboration and behaviours. And did we have critical mass? That was one. And I suppose the second element was when, even though, yes, ours was a merger, but it's our board taking on the trust. It was Maritime continuing, so it was the Maritime board staying on. So where possible, you're trying to merge good practice, but you have to take into consideration that it's a takeover as well. So it's those difficult decisions really early on, like who's going to be your CFO, because two CFOs going into one, you know, where you're going to have central teams led by different people. So it was, did we have the people that could lead those teams? So if we made the difficult decisions early, did we have people that were in agreement in how we worked and our behaviour? So they were the key ones for me.
I would say the other thing, sorry, I would say the other thing in that as well, in terms of non-negotiables, was really frank and open conversation. So that was kind of the first thing between the other chair and myself, was that this is a warts and all conversation. There's absolutely, we don't want any surprises on the other side. And I think we held that right from the very first phone call right through into Nick going in as interim CEO and ongoing. And I think that was really helpful, because as much as, you know, you were working at pace, and this all started literally weeks before COVID. But because we had that level of trust and those clear and honest conversations, it was able to keep things moving at pace.
There's a couple of really important points you've made there, both of you, around what we know lies behind successful mergers. The first one is that frankness and that ability up front to say, you know, where further down the line may there be conflict, and what do we need to resolve now and agree to now, in order to that we're not dragged down by those conversations or knocked off course by them later. And of course, who's going to take on which role? Not an issue with the CEO in this case, Nick, because you were the interim CEO, but with those other key roles, very true. And we certainly know where two CEOs come together, that conversation needs to happen very, very early on. Wasn't an issue for, and we'll talk to Phil in a moment, for him because he knew he was going. The second thing I think you mentioned there that sits behind successful mergers is time to get to know one another, to work together, and to get a sense of whether there is a fit. And that's not a luxury that many trusts or many organizations merging together can have, for obvious reasons. So it sounds like a positive opportunity that you had there. And of course, in the circumstances of COVID, quite clearly everyone's working under pressure and stress. You get to know one another quite quickly in that context. Phil, just going back to that question around non-negotiables, and were there any red lines for you at an early stage around the trust you were merging with, and you know, what the assurances you needed to have?
The board led the process, and I stepped back a little bit. That turned out to be an error, in my view. We'll come to that later on. But the board were very keen that the three head teachers of the schools could feel comfortable with the trust that the board was committing to. And if any of the three of them said, no, we couldn't work, I couldn't work with that particular CEO, then they were out of there. It wasn't going to go ahead. And clearly, the heads were given a briefing here to say, you're not going to find a perfect trust. Don't think that there's going to be anything out there that is going to be spectacular and really hook you in. And because we were working in a well-run trust that was moving forward nicely, so they were very sensible about it, and that turned out to be something that they agreed on pretty rapidly, because they were involved in discussions with the chairs of each of the trusts and also the CEOs. So that wasn't too much of a problem. The other one was there had to be a key role for the outstanding school. We knew that Rushcliffe was an outstanding school, as good as any in Nottinghamshire, as good as any in the East Midlands. And the last thing we wanted was to feel as though it was just going to be part of a bigger organisation and was subservient to anybody else. It felt as though it should be a driving force within the organisation. And also, I've touched upon this before, but we didn't want to be working with any trust that didn't have experience of working in challenging circumstances. That was crucial, because we made a commitment to Farnborough and we wanted to make sure that it was well looked after.
Thank you. So I just, before moving on, just to ask Julianne about that question of knowing your partners, knowing them well, spending time getting to know them. Did you know the other trusts well and the other heads well, Julianne, or was that part of the process, getting to know them?
Well, a little bit of both. The other trust was another Methodist trust, and there's only 66 Methodist schools across the whole country. So as a family of schools, we all do know each other. And so I knew of the head teachers, I knew the trust a little bit, but actually it was really important, a bit like Nick just said, that getting to know each other and working together. And we did a very similar thing in, you know, I'd started to work as CEO in both trusts since last November, and the opportunities that COVID brought to have that joined up thinking, joined up approach, sharing of ideas, actually really cemented some of those relationships and helped us to see actually where that ethos really aligned, as decisions we were making actually seamlessly worked collaboratively across both trusts.
Great, thank you. So there is a theme here, and it'd be interesting to explore further if this theme sits behind other successful mergers. Is that in the three examples we have here, it was quite clear that there would be one CEO out of the two potential vacancies and so on, and maybe a barrier that was overcome quite quickly. Interesting, you know, where we, as I said earlier, where we do find mergers can be difficult is where there is an ambiguity around the chief executive role, and of course very senior roles, as Nick alluded to. I now want to move on to staff, if I can, because obviously this is a big development for staff, and particularly those at the centre of the organisation in the central teams, because of the potential for job losses, the potential for roles being merged, and so on, and of course that change of leadership for some, and potentially inevitably a slight shift in culture too. So I wanted to ask about when and how did you communicate the potential merger as it was at the time to staff? And what did you learn from that? What went well and what could have gone better? So if I could ask Tiffany first.
I think we were, because it was happening all quite quickly as well, and because Nick was coming in as interim CEO, we wanted to make sure that we really focused on those comms and that communication, making sure that it was really tight and that people understood where they stood, and that this was about vision and ethos, and Nick was there to support. I'll let Nick explain.
Yeah, so the chair of trustees of the other trust told their head teachers and their central staff on the Monday afternoon, and I started on the Tuesday morning. So my first day was really just trying to deal with the panic and and be a calming presence and speak to as many people as possible and answer as many questions. So that first week was getting into all of the schools, speaking with all the staff, and answering all the questions. And then every time a question was sent to me, then sending out answers to the wider staff, so they got to hear everybody's questions and the answer all along. In the first couple of weeks, we then had to make the difficult decisions around what that central team would start to look like. So when you look at two sort of smallest trusts that are similar age, we've both had grown in different directions. So it was how we would merge them and what would those central teams look like. And the key thing was who would then lead them. So we did have to make a couple of redundancies, and we had to have those conversations early on. A, because it was fair on them. B, so people knew what direction we were going in, and then that would hopefully calm down anybody going forward that are not worrying about their job, because those conversations have already happened. Because there is a lot of anxiety around this and the unknown, and that was a difficult thing to deal with. There were lots of the times we didn't know the answers to lots of questions, but we had to communicate that we didn't know the answers, just so that they were reassured that there wasn't a dark secret answer that was going to affect them. So we had to do a lot of communication where we said, this is what we have decided on the future. This is the direction we're going. These are still unknowns. Please wait with us. I think what worked really well, as we did a lot of work with the new staff that were coming in around their kind of psychological safety, working with them, making them see that they were part of the long-term future, constantly trying to reassure and keep the communication up as much as possible. And that worked really well, and getting them working with the existing maritime staff. If I look back in hindsight to where we could have gone differently, I think I probably invested too much time on the staff from the previous trust who were coming into us, and I didn't take into consideration enough the existing staff that were going to be led by members of the older trust, because they would be going through, even though they were still maritime, they were going to have a new leader of their team. And if I could rewind, that's definitely one thing I would work on from the off, is focusing the same amount of attention on those staff.
Great, thank you, Nick. Phil, for you, obviously there was a bit of a double whammy in that you were leaving, and I imagine you'd been quite clear about that before merger, or were the two announcements made at the same time?
They were made at the same time, as far as I can recall. Yeah, I remember announcing and telling the board that I wanted to go just before Christmas, and then we thought we considered things over the Christmas holiday, and then we I told the heads at the start of January, and we put out a letter to all members of staff explaining what was going to be going on, and that we would be exploring the idea of merger with another trust. Now it's difficult to know, isn't it, when you're the CEO, about how it went down. I don't think. I would hope that one or two people were disappointed I was going, but perhaps I'm flattering myself. I think most people just thought, well, merger, it'll be fine. We trust the board, we trust the heads to come to the right decision. And eventually, when it had been decided who we were going to merge with, there were big staff events organised. So key people from Spencer came in and spoke to all the staff together, and they were free to ask any questions that they wanted to. And that was the way in which we communicated. And then over a period of time, the presence of some of their key staff became more frequent at the schools, and it just became kind of normal to see them around, and not normal to see me around so much. So in the communication, at no point did we get uproar. We didn't get any unions saying, this is outrageous, how can this be happening, this isn't democratic. It was just a case of, and to an extent, I think that was because we built up quite a lot of trust within our trust. And it worked. The staff went along with it without feeling particularly anxious. I think people may be listening and saying, you've no idea how traumatized we were. I think the people in my central team, they were troubled by it because they didn't know what was coming. They were told there would be jobs for them, but they did feel uneasy about it all, understandably. And as it happened, two of them were made redundant. They weren't particularly anxious about being made redundant in the end. One person went to work in industry, and somebody else left the organisation completely. So they were the 4 job losses, if you like. But it was pretty smooth process, I think.
Julianne, how was your experience in terms of staff and communication and keeping people reassured and so on?
Yes, I think some similarities and some differences in that within the Acorn Trust team, we were very well established and we got that real strong trust with each other. The Wesley Trust didn't really have much of a central team. There was just me as a part-time CEO and a part-time CFO. So that bringing together of the 2 central teams wasn't as significant as it was for other people. It just meant an alignment and a change of certain people's roles, which did create some unsettlement, but not in the way that people were fearing that the job would be at risk. When I think about the wider stuff, I think one of the things that I made a decision very early doors was that actually I was going to share the vision, the why, with everybody and not the what we were doing. So very much starting with why we were doing what we were doing, what we felt would benefit from it, and then leading on to more information. Really strong communication throughout with people, I think, really helped that. Actually, we didn't have very many people who didn't support what we were doing or couldn't see the benefits that we would have from it. That actually it felt quite a smooth process. But I think that continual communication, and we had consultations with all stakeholders where we shared that vision, shared opportunities to ask questions, and like other people have said, shared the answers. So we were very open about any questions that were raised and our answers to them. And I think it overcame a lot of that anxiety that comes when it's unknown, and when it's unknown, people make their own answers, which, you know, more often than not are not the right answer.
Yeah, so it seems to me there's a theme here as well around trust in you as the leaders, whether the outgoing leader or the leader that's taking on the merged trust in you to first of all, in terms of your motivation. I think what you touched on, Julianne, explaining the why, explaining the reasons for the merger, but also as Nick said, you know, being honest and frank with people about what you know and what you don't know, and then people kind of know where they stand. And of course, with Phil, I think it sounds, Phil, that people trusted in you to and the board to make the right decision for them, and knew you well and knew that you would do that as an outgoing CEO. So certainly trust and honesty and openness sounds, as far as you can be, sounds like a good strategy. I want to ask now about a merger is obviously an enormous undertaking, resource, time, energy, and so on, and how really as chief executives and leaders within your organizations you found the capacity to do it, and of course it demands an enormous amount of project management and process too. So if I could begin with you, Julianne, and then go to Nick and Tiffany.
Yes, we actually project manage most of it ourselves, and you're right, it was a huge undertaking. And I think we had the benefits of having the summer holidays at a real key time within our merger process that actually gave us a little bit of capacity we may otherwise have not had. And for us, the things that seemed really important was to have a really strong timeline of key tasks. So we were really clear about what was happening, at what time, what deadlines were, and who was responsible. So there was no ambiguity about what was happening. I think pulling on the advisor specialists where you need to supporting that was really important as well. So we did most of it ourselves, and it was that continual coming back, checking where we're up to and next steps.
Thanks, Julianne. So Nick and Tiffany, a similar experience?
Yeah, I would say very similar experience. We had one person lead on it from each of the trusts to help with our pace setting, meeting the deadlines, and making sure we had all the paperwork signed off, printed off. So that bit went really smoothly. I'd say the biggest shock was post-merger. So it's that term immediately after, because you've brought two trusts together. You want to get those meetings in the diary. You want to get people working together, and then you chuck in the day job anyway, and you realise there's just not enough time in the day. So I think, again, if I could rewind, it would be building in a bit of a circuit breaker in the diary for that first term, in case, I don't know, say you had a global pandemic or something like that going on, that you could deal with those sorts of situations whilst bringing the two trusts together.
Tiffany, from a chair's point of view, tell me about how you saw the risk here. The capacity, the energy and the time from your senior leaders, and of course you're as Nick mentions, there's a pandemic and there's also school improvement to deliver as well.
Yeah, there are just a few things going on simultaneously. I think for us we were under no illusions that this was going to be something really easy and just it would just be all super smooth and easy. And that also in terms of merging, it was also a change for Nick's role as well, because he was suddenly going from CEO of 8 schools to CEO of 13 and doing that in the midst of a pandemic. And so I think we were all really cognizant of the amount and the scale of change that was going on. I think it helped that he was in as interim CEO from the outset, because he was able to really start paving the way for a lot of decisions and really start doing the due diligence and knowing all of that. So we were able to get a lot of information really rapidly. But I think the kind of the key thing was that we really understood the depths of what it was that he was dealing with. And we were also making sure that he had that space as much as possible, given the circumstances going on, to be able to really think about that and really think about the strategy for that, and making sure that he had the support from us as well, because I think that was it was huge for any CEO with the pandemic anyway, and having that on top. I think we were all really, really cognizant of that and making sure that we were there for him for that.
Thanks, Tiffany. I'm going to ask that question of Julianne and Phil actually about the board and in terms of your capacity and the demands of leading this. Phil, how was that for you? Because you were an outgoing CEO, but you certainly wouldn't have felt like you were slowing down, I imagine.
Oh, I did. Yeah, I did feel like I was. I mean, I've got to be frank. Yeah, I think a lot of the job of the CEO is to look to the future, and the future wasn't there for me to look to anymore. I wasn't the person that was going to be planning the way forward. So it did create space, and I was able to get involved whenever. But I think the onus was so much upon the incoming trust, the one that because we can pretend as much as we wanted to that this was merger. I think in many eyes it will be seen as takeover, because the CEO steps away, a new trust moves in. They were doing so much of the driving of the organisation because they were going to be picking up the tab. Of course they were. I understood all that. So I was able to contribute as required. But I also had the huge bonus, and I think it was a bonus, of having two hugely enthusiastic and experienced board members, the chair and vice chair. One had been a lawyer, he'd recently retired as a lawyer, a solicitor, and then another one had been a senior member of staff at Boots. So these two people knew how to organise things. They understood the concept of merger, and they managed so much of it from a board level. And their view was, and my view was as well, they were still going to be around in September, and I wasn't. So they worked closely with the head teachers, and I contributed as required. So I could pretend that I was rushed off my feet, but Michael wasn't. I can't pretend I was.
Julianne, for you, the board, the role they played in supporting you and guiding this, or was it more about your team, or both?
I would say it was both. I think we, as I mentioned earlier, we set up a working party quite early doors, which had key members of both boards on it. And the people who sat on that were the people who had those skills. So we had somebody who was a chief operating officer in a large academy trust. We had somebody with legal experience, somebody with significant financial experience, and they sat on that working party and really helped to shape the direction. But on that working party were also members of the central team. So it was the two working together. I think, again, being CEO of both trusts really helped with that and helped shape some of that direction forward, because you get to know both organisations very quickly. So when you're planning ahead and thinking about that vision of what's coming ahead, you're able to do that. I think hindsight, a bit like Nick said, I think it is post-merger where you feel that pressure to kind of get lots of things in place. And I think having more time now would have been a real advantage. And I think I wish I'd spoken to Nick half a term ago, and I would have planned that in really, to just give yourself that space to have that real strategic focus on moving forward in the way you want to.
But it sounds to me like knowing who your CEO is going to be from an early stage, whether that's you or not you, is a big advantage in all of this and in moving things along. I've got a few more questions, 2 or 3 more questions. I wanted to ask about due diligence and your experience of due diligence, and what were the things that you were pleased you'd done, the things that it was crucial to check and to get right, and what perhaps would you've done slightly differently around due diligence. I'll start with Tiffany and Nick on that one.
So for due diligence on this, what I would say is like Julianne said earlier, is using outside people where possible is a great help. So the auditors to run over each other's accounts, for our bringing in outside people to look at the state of the buildings, to know what's in the pipeline of anything coming up. So using those was really useful and really beneficial. One of the huge positives I'd say of merging is it gives you the opportunity to really stop and forces you to reflect on your trust as a whole. It's a brilliant piece of self-reflection to say, which organisation is doing this better? Which one do we want to be taking forward in the future? What method? What strategy? Are we really as good as this as we think we are? So for me, that was a huge plus. That every sort of aspect of the organisation, we were just stopping and saying, why do we do it this way? Is this way better, or is their way better? So even though Maritime was the one sort of doing the takeover, you are merging by taking the best practice from the different trusts. What I would say now, our next step is not to stop there though. It's to then go back to our vision and our strategy and sort of rebuild. So yes, we felt Barnsdale was better at this, and yes, we felt Maritime was better at this aspect, or maybe something in HR or performance management. But actually moving forward, if we go back to the why are we doing this and what are we trying to achieve? And I think now's the stage we've merged to go back over that and co-create it.
Yeah. Great. Julianne, anything, reflections on due diligence?
Yeah, we took a very similar approach in, we looked at all those key things and what worked best in each trust that we could take forward. And that was really important because we wanted it to feel like a coming together of two trusts. So it was really important that we took the very best of each and brought that together. And we used the expertise, as I've already mentioned, of other people to support, like our auditors, to really help us understand where things were up to. A lot of the intelligence I knew because I was working within both trusts already. And, for me, they were the key things in moving forward and really understanding. And I love what Nick said about self-reflection, about where we're up to, because I think when you lead a trust, you're very proud of it and you see all its strengths. And it's only when you unpick things at this level that you begin to see that actually I could have done that slightly better, or as an organisation this would help us be even stronger. And so having that opportunity to do that, I think, will strengthen us moving forward as the newly merged trust.
That's great. And we sometimes forget, don't we, that with all academy trusts, and I say all of them because we're talking about less than a decade still very young organizations that are still learning, growing, will have, all have their strengths and weaknesses. And, as any startup does. Phil, listening to that and your reflections on due diligence as a outgoing CEO, but taking your trust into that merger, reflections on due diligence.
It's interesting what Julianne said about the idea that when you are completely at the heart of a trust, you can see all its strengths and you feel a real affection for it, and you don't want to see the negative side highlighted too much by colleagues coming in. But we were in a strange position, really, because we did have an outstanding school. It hadn't been inspected for 4 years. Was it still outstanding? Our view was that it was. The results suggested that. We had people coming in and they started picking a few holes in it. And that created a bit of prickliness, because we were saying, hang on a second, we've been into your schools. There's nothing that remarkable about yours either. And some of the things were just basic things that, it happens in the day-to-day running of a school. That created just a bit of friction, this idea of who do you think you are coming in saying this? And some of it was perhaps us being a bit oversensitive. So there was that side of it. The other side of it was related to finance, because there was some confusion around finance, because one of the schools was so attractive, pulling in lots of youngsters and hadn't been given the funds for that. And there was a sudden surge. There was a lot of investment in buildings going on. And added to that, we'd done a lot of planning, as I mentioned earlier, on the assumption that another school was going to be joining us, and the other school wasn't allowed to join by the Regional Schools Commissioner. So as a result, that created a bit of a blurring of the edges around finance. And that was something that led to a whole lot of queries. But we didn't want to push the due diligence too hard. And this was one of the sensitivities of it, because we're in a position where I was going, and by the time we got to May and June, the idea of saying, no, our due diligence is saying that you're not really an appropriate group. Now, they were fine. It wasn't a problem. But just imagine if they hadn't been, and we'd gone so far down the line, and we then started finding problems, we could have been left completely rudderless, and they'd have been trying to persuade me to carry on in September. And the uncertainty associated that would have been good. Now, we were blessed, because it was a well-run trust that was merging with us. They knew what they were doing. It wasn't a problem. But just imagine if it hadn't been. And that's why due diligence needs to be done. It would have been much better if we'd been working with them for a year. So we'd have got to know each other a whole lot better in that time. And then we wouldn't have had this rather rushed due diligence late in the day.
Of course, if you think about the examples from business, think about the mergers of two well-known supermarket, or potential mergers of two well-known supermarkets a year or two ago, and then the Competition Commissioner comes in at the last minute, and the millions upon millions of pounds that are lost as a result of that failed merger. So, you know, due diligence and making sure that the legal boxes are ticked very early on as well, because as you say, Phil, you can get so far down the line in all of this, and you know, if you haven't asked those basic questions first, which it sounds like you had, and these were kind of surplus questions in many cases, but if a fundamental question comes up at that late stage, you think about the time and the energy and the money that's invested in these mergers.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want 2 more questions to go, colleagues, and the penultimate one is this: just asking about how you've marked the birth of the new organisation, because it is important for people to move from one organisation to new, to get that sense of a new era, a new mindset, perhaps, and certainly being part of one organisation. And probably a question for Julianne and Nick and Tiffany, but I'm interested, Phil, in your take as an observer on your merger as well. So Tiffany and Nick, first of all, you know, how have you marked it? How have you welcomed people and given a sense that this is a new phase?
Go ahead.
Well, I suppose in September we did. It was a bit of business as usual because I'd already started there in the spring term across the trusts. So part of what we were aiming for was, look, it's business as usual. It's not this massive dramatic change. So we just tried to keep going. We did things. We wrote to all members of staff. The new trust coming in had access to our sort of online hub, which has it's like a rewards gateway with some of the perks you can get for being part of Maritime. So we did things like that. We did silly things like on their first inset days, we made sure an ice cream van turned up and they all had ice creams. Now, I can't recommend that in the UK with our weather, but it was sunny on those days, so it did go down well. So it was early things like that to note that there was a difference. And it's been trying to keep the communication up through sort of the Maritime newsletters. One of the things that I've never been keen to do, I'd rather rip my skin off, but COVID has made me do things like little videos for the staff, to talk to the staff directly. And we had to do that because of the necessity when we had, you know, all the kerfuffles around wider openings. And in the areas that we were in, there was a lot of union pressure about trying to stop the wider openings. So I was creating a lot of videos to reassure, to speak to staff. And actually what I found when I was going around the schools in early September is people were speaking to me like they knew me a lot better than they did. And it was because, unfortunately for them, they'd seen a lot more of me on video. So that was something I've learned out of this process as well, that although you are distant, is trying to close that gap as much as possible. So that's something that we've tried to do as part of the new trust. So when we do teaching and learning reviews, you know, the education lead is making little videos to speak directly to the staff within the schools. So we're speaking to staff. We're not using the head teachers as gatekeepers as much as part of the new trust. It's speaking to them as often as we can, really. Tiff?
That's great. So an opportunity to kind of improve the way the trust communicates, and for you to evolve as a chief executive as well, Nick, in some ways.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Tiffany, from a board point of view, you know, do you have a new board? Have you got has the board changed, or are you the same entity as before?
No, we're the same entity as before. What we did do, and what was one of the huge pluses of merging with the other trust, was that they had a really strong company secretary and governance lead. And so she came over to us, which has been absolutely brilliant. And so we've been doing a lot of work with her, and that's really helped to kind of ensure those kind of smooth relationships with the local boards from the other trust as well, because we've got this consistency going on. And I think we did that in other areas as well, because, you know, we have our school improvement model, and there's people from that other trust who are part of the research team involved with that and everything. So I think that's really helped, because everybody's really seen that actually they are all part of this team now, and whichever kind of part of the organization you're in. So that's been really helpful.
Thanks. And Julianne, for you, the birth of this new trust, because it is a new trust, it's got a new name. What's been your experience of kind of bringing that new era in?
Yes, well, we actually sponsor a new school on the 1st of December. So for us, we feel that's when we all come together as one, and we'll do some celebrations. But what we did do was for Acorn, as we finished, we sat back and we reflected, and as staff, as parents, as governors, they all sent in what they saw as the highlights of our 7 years as a trust, and we created a newsletter with those stories on and people's reflections and things, which we sent out just a couple of days before the merger. But one of the things that I did do, a bit like Nick said, I've recognised how important it is to have that real strong communication and continuous communication. So I wrote letters to all the stakeholders, to staff, to parents, to the labs, and really tried to personalise them, reflecting on some of the things that we'd learned and some of the things that I really felt we were going to achieve coming together. Had we not been in COVID, and something that I hope to do somewhere in the future is to have a big conference where we can actually all come together physically and to do some of that sharing and, you know, getting to know one another in person. One of the things we did do quite quickly was to set up some of those wider networks of collaborative working for staff and for parents and for governors. And so they've really helped in shaping that communication going forward. But we're looking forward to celebrating wider when we can all come together.
But it sounds like you're already bringing people together across the two cultures as you become one, and you know, communication not just from you and the central team down, but across between, as you say, teachers, schools, parents, and so on. So that's great to hear. And I know I was one of the recipients of your letter as you merged, and it was great to get that, just to hear about it. And I think there will be many people around your trust that feel included in what you've been doing and know where you are going next. So thank you for that. Phil, as an outsider in a trust that merged and seeing those two cultures come together, and I'm not sure how aware you were post merger, but did it feel like a new trust, do you think? Did people come together as one?
I'm pretty sure it felt like a new trust for the guys in the Trent Academies group. The Spencer Academies Trust, I really can't speak as to whether it felt any different to them. We were conscious of the fact that we're losing our name. The name was disappearing. We're really quite proud of the name. We thought the Trent Academies Group was quite a good name. And we tried to persuade Spencer to change to the Trent Academies Group, but they'd rebranded the year before when the new CEO had turned up, and they didn't fancy changing again. And our board understood that, and that was fine. But we produced a booklet that explained everything that the Trent Academies Group had done over 3 years. Quite proud of that. Shared that with all the staff, all sorts of things in there to show that this had been a going concern that had been successful, but had ceased to be. And as far as the future goes, well, I was just out of there. I was listening to a Desert Island Discs edition yesterday with Arsene Wenger talking about leaving Arsenal. I could empathise just a little bit with him, and that he was saying that he's still a big fan of Arsenal, but he doesn't get involved. And I'm still a big fan of the three schools that I was involved in, and the bigger trust. I look at it and I feel a real warmth for everything that goes on there, which is a nice way to be. However, I don't go back, and I don't really speak to many people, so I don't know how it's gone. I don't really know what hearing.
But that what comes through there as well is celebrating what's gone. And yes. Julianne mentioned that as well, celebrating what's gone and recognising what's gone, as well as ushering in that new
and
new
I
era.
think, Michael, that was important, because anybody looking at it could see it as a takeover. Of course they could see it as a takeover rather than a merger, and some of that was because of the fact that I'd made my decision to go before that partnership had started, and we weren't able to manage the merger in the way that we would have wanted to if I'd been a more involved CEO for the next 12 months.
And as we move demographically and seeing more CEOs and more trust leaders move into retirement, and the challenges in bringing the next generation on, I think we could well see more of these retirement-driven mergers. And as we've heard in the call today, there are some benefits to that if you do know who your next chief executive is going to be from an early stage. So the last question I want to ask you all, and thank you so much for being involved today, and there'll be trust leaders and CEOs and board members across the country listening to this and pick up lots of ideas and useful tips. So thank you for sharing them. What is the best advice you could give, having been through successful mergers that have come to their conclusion? What's your best advice for those listening in? And I'll start with Tiffany and Nick, and then Julianne and Phil, please.
Yeah, for me, I think it's really viewing it as a real opportunity for organizational development, because I was just sitting here thinking while everybody was talking, we were 8 schools when this started. And I think had we kind of gone the route that we had gone before, where we might have a sponsor school or we might have an occasional school that wanted to join, and we kind of grew incrementally like that to the point that we're at now, you wouldn't have that wholesale look at the structure and everything. So I think it was a real opportunity for the development of the organization that it did happen the way that it did. Like Nick was saying, where we could really look at, well, whose system is better, whose policy is better on this, who's actually doing this better. And I think viewing it as that opportunity is really, really important for organizational development. I'm just being really, really open to that and having those conversations and making sure you're getting it right.
So a chance to learn and to get better, not to build a greater empire. This is about learning, it's about development, and it's about improvement. Nick.
Yeah, I would just build on what Tiffany said. So when you asked that, I thought of 3 things. So one was tackle it with humility, because it's a perfect opportunity to reflect on what you do well, what you don't do so well, and what you can develop. So I would say that was key 1. Key 2 is time. So build yourself in time post-merger for the work that you're going to need to do, and understand that there's a lot to do in the merger. So you're not going to be able to get it all done straight away, and that's okay, because the organisation is going to be going for a long time if it's gone well, and not everything has to be solved in the merger period. So I'd say building in time is a key thing. And the third one is people. Close that gap with people as much as possible. Try to limit the room for people to worry or to make up their own thoughts about what's going to happen in the future. So as much as you can communicate, the better. Just you can't over communicate during that period. So I'd say humility, time, and people would be mine.
Thank you, Nick. Brilliant advice. And Julianne.
Yes, so I take the people on the journey with you, having that clear vision, and that open communication is really important. As Nick said, this is a long-term journey, so if you get it right here, it helps to build upon it moving forward. Be clear with your why, because if you focus continually on your why, then actually it lets you see what's available before you and stops you from becoming so blinkered in the way forward that actually you stop at the first hurdle, when actually you could overcome it and get to that why. And then I put honesty, because one of the things that I've learned through this situation was there was times when actually it did get tricky and we did have to have some very difficult conversations, but because we were open and honest, we were able to overcome those issues to get to where we needed to be. So I think that honesty is really important, and they would be the 3 that I would encourage people to just think about if they were thinking about merger.
Thank you. So lots of synergy there for between you both around the advice as chief execs. Phil, final word with you in terms of advice and look for those looking to merger.
get everything written down. Everything that you think is going to happen, make sure it's in ink, and that both parties have got agreement as to what's been written down. We had it's slightly unfortunate in that my contract ended at the end of August. The RSC held up the formal merger until October, and in that intervening period, a decision was made that the representation on the new board was going to be much reduced on our side. And that was quite hurtful. I only found out about that around Christmas time afterwards, and I was thinking that was a minor thing that could have easily been agreed to. But they were looking at things in a different way, and that it was their call, of course it was. So I think the idea of getting everything written down, and the other one is what I've mentioned before, and that is work with the trust first. Don't rush into it. Make sure you've got a succession plan in place, and if you're not going to replace with a new CEO and you do want to merge, make sure you really know that trust inside out. It's worked, I've got to say, when I look at the way the schools are moving from a distance, it all seems very amicable, very professional, and this is a crucial thing, of course. The children, the communities are benefiting from that.
Thanks to you all. It's been a really insightful hour. Thanks for all your advice, your reflections, and for taking us through your experiences. You know, this is what it's all about: sharing, those that have been through it, sharing with the rest of the sector, so that we can all learn together. And you know, mergers are becoming more inevitable. We're seeing more of them taking place, and the more we can share your success and your reflections, the better placed others are going to be to succeed in that. So thank you. Thanks for your time. It's much appreciated, and take care and stay safe.